Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast. This is your host, Amit Somani, and I am delighted to have with me today Amrit Acharya, co founder and CEO of Zetwerk. Welcome to the show, Amrit.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Amrit, I think really excited to talk to you about Zetwerk because you are basically making brand new inroads into an area that has otherwise been largely, if I can say so, old world economy and actually bringing it to the new ages. So maybe you can tell our listeners just a little bit about the founding story of Zetwerk and the inspiration for the idea as it was back then. We'll talk about the evolution later. What
Sure.
inspired you to start up in this area? Maybe a little bit of your background as well.
Yes, so I grew up in Bhubaneswar, and so I come from a small town environment. And after I graduated from undergrad, my first job was with ITC, which is a large consumer goods conglomerate. And within ITC, my first role was to build a new factory for them. So I was basically 21, 22, straight out of college. And when I joined, they had just bought the land. And over the next 2 years, built all the buildings, bought a lot of machines, hired close to 1,000 people. And I really fell in love with manufacturing. I also ran the factory for a brief amount before I handed it over to the operations team. But that was my first love affair with manufacturing, and I took a detour after that. I spent 2 more years at ITC. I spent some time in the US, and decided to come back to India. And when I came back to India, I both me and one of my co-founders, Srinath, we were just reconnecting and looking back at our past life. And for me, when I went back to my colleagues who were still at ITC, the way I was managing this entire process of spending of almost 400, 500 crores of spend, all done through Excel, Google Sheets. Nothing had changed, even though 5 years had passed. So I felt that this is an area and when I came back to India, there was a lot of this is 2018. There was the whole startup wave was also just really crescending. Swiggy had just become a unicorn. And there's a lot of conversation around building for consumers, but we felt that we had seen a blind spot which had not been addressed, and we also it also helped that we really liked the space. So we thought we'll start something in manufacturing.
Sounds great. I'm just curious on double clicking on what does it mean to fall in love with manufacturing, right? I know you went to, I think you did electrical engineering, if I'm not mistaken. But are you like tinkering or just this notion of like there's nothing, there's a design, and now you get a product which will, because unlike a consumer product where you can touch and feel it, I guess manufacturing also you can, but not necessarily the end thing. So just curious about that.
No, I've always been like that. I think I grew up loving Legos because you could use it to build things. Even in undergrad, we were part of this program where we actually built a running vehicle from scrap, and we won a prize where I got an internship with Bosch in Bangalore during my second year, and that's where I actually saw the whole Bosch manufacturing process. So I've always been like that person who loves tinkering with machines, building things from bare hands in some way, and it was a weird coincidence that my first job at ITC also required me to do that. So in some ways, the dots connect backwards, and it was a great fit for me.
No, fantastic. Switching just a little bit to your personal journey, you said you went abroad to do your MBA, right, at Haas in Berkeley. What was the incentive to come back? What was the motivation, right? That's another, because we have, China has gone through this whole journey where people have gone out, stayed there forever, gone out, come back, right? I myself came back to India 14 years ago, but I was a minority. Now it seems to be happening more frequently. So what brought you back?
I mean, it's a combination of personal and professional reasons. More importantly, I was at McKinsey, and after graduating, I spent a year there. I liked McKinsey, but I realized that I need to work in the US. I needed like an H-1B visa. You need a certain non-immigrant visa to work there. And if I had to start up at some point, I didn't really have full control of my destiny. and the only way to do that would be to get to have more permanent solutions, which meant that I would have to stay at McKinsey for like 4 5 years 6 years possibly, to go through that entire journey of lot of which a lot of people do. I felt that in my prime, like I was early 20s, there was a lot of action back at home. Like people, a lot of my friends were starting companies and they were doing really well, and I could see these people and feel that this is something which I can also do. But it required that leap of faith that I'm going to give up this entire thing that's going really well for me. My father didn't really understand it when I came back to India without a job, even like I quit McKinsey, and also it was that was the year when I was getting married. So three things happened at the same time. I was getting married, moving back to India, and starting a new company. So it was a little too much for my dad, but I felt very strong about it. That yeah, this is what I need to do at this point in time. I gave myself a year that if it doesn't work out, then maybe I'll go back or something like that. But I was fully committed that I'm here. I'm here for a reason.
No, that's very heartening to hear. So hopefully, if there are people listening to this in the US, right, India is, abuzz with opportunity and lots of interesting things to do. So maybe the early journey at Zetwerk, right? At least what my recollection is, and you can obviously tell it better, that the focus and the foray was largely around software and automation, and basically, if I may say so, sassifying the whole kind of. Can you just talk to us about both the early days and how it has evolved to what it is now?
Yeah. So initially, again, like I was just looking back at my personal journey. When I was at ITC doing this big project, I was managing hundreds of vendors, all on Google Sheets or Excel, managing almost $100 million of spend at one point in time. And I just felt that there can be a better way to do this. There were softwares like Ariba, which SAP had acquired, which was really good at solving this for like a normal purchase process. But when you're buying something very custom, the process is very different. So we thought we'll build Ariba for custom procurement. When you want to buy something, not like you don't want to buy a laptop, but you want to buy a process where there's a lot of back and forth on iteration on design, or you have to find many vendors. So we thought we'll build that software suite, which felt missing, and we spoke to a lot of customers. We spoke to companies in L&T, GE, like some of the largest companies, and everybody said, "Oh, this is I need this yesterday." So that gave us a lot of confidence, and a little bit of naivety was there, which you require as an entrepreneur. We said we'll build this business, and we raised a seed round from K and Sequoia, and we started immediately building the product, whatever we had in our mind, and we took a couple of months to build that what you call MVP in startup parlance, and we went back to the same set of customers who had said, I theoretically love this concept. And when they saw this, they actually liked it even more. They said, "This is exactly what I was looking for. Can you do X, Y, Z features?" They were very participative in the company building process. But when the talks became more commercial, that's when we hit a big roadblock. Like we heard all kinds of things. He said, some people said, "Oh, I don't make this decision. Our IT makes this decision." When we went to IT, they were like, "Oh, is this cloud software or is it? Can I host it on my servers?" This is, 2018, but people were still talking that language. Some people said, "I don't make this decision in India. Like I can introduce you to my CIO in US or Switzerland." So, and then we quickly realized that the feedback loop in building this business is a very slow process, and we realized it was not good fit for us as founders. We were a little bit more impatient. And B, we were also hearing from our customers, "Can I use this software to discover new suppliers?" So that came up enough times. People were not saying it very explicitly, but if you were listened well enough, that was what they were saying. And we said, let's try this out. Let's go for a more transaction first approach, than a complete change management approach, which is what SaaS is. And that pivot really worked for us. Like, in fact, we made the pivot before we had closed our seed round. You may know this, Amit. Like between term sheet and closure, it takes 3 months. We had not even received the money in the bank, but we went back to our investors and said, "Look, we are changing the business. but we got good support, and that really worked well for us. And we started getting a lot of uh, strong interest from customers saying, "Hey, can you make this? Can you make this? Can you have suppliers for X, Y, Z?" And we're not looked back.
That is terrific. I have at least 4 or 5 follow-on questions. I'll try to pace myself on
Yeah,
each of those. And I love the first one, the comment that you made, which is one that you were doing customer discovery, right? And talking to people even before you started building your MVP and then during and post the MVP. So that alone is quite interesting. But the second, which is less done, and I think it is such an atrocious waste, which is this not just doing the discovery like, hey, is this nice? Is this interesting? What do you think? But willingness to pay and back it and make the decision and sign the purchase order, right?
yeah.
And not enough people do it early enough in the journey, right? Because people are like, no, no, they're loving this. They just didn't want me to leave the office, etc. So what gave you this beyond your impatience, as you cited, this insight to say, let's figure out, boss, are you going to pay for this and are you going to do it quickly?
But to be fair, like we did try, like we did engage in good faith with all of these leads. Like we were at one point contemplating even going to Switzerland and meet the CIO of, this large company where, it would have taken, getting that meeting itself is sometimes difficult. But I mean, I don't know what to call it. You can call it intuition. You can call it, just visualize. Like I guess we visualized it. Like what is the best case scenario 12 months down the line? We felt the best case scenario 12 months down the line is 4 or 5 customers at max. I could not see a situation where we would have anything better than that. And were we satisfied with that outcome? We felt we would not be satisfied with that outcome. We would feel restless. We would feel uh, uncomfortable fundamentally. That after spending close to 1.5 years of our time, this is what we had to show for it. So it is just it's interesting. And today we have gone back to that. Today we do sell. We've built a lot of software, so we have packaged it and sell it back to the same customers. Today a business can absorb such large sales cycles, but we did feel that we wanted to get to revenue faster. Um, and it could be just fit as founders also. Like, so some of the people I really respect are founders who do enterprise SaaS, because I've seen personally how tough it is to sell that in India.
Excellent. So I think willingness to pay and really figuring out intuition plus some data as to how long that cycle will be was one good learning. The other one that you said, which was music to my ears, is if you had listened well enough, the market and the customers and the overall vibe will tell you, potentially where the pot of gold is or where the interesting opportunity to solve is. Can you further kind of double click on that a little bit, both as a practice and how you applied it at Zetwerk?
Yeah, again, it's like nobody will say it explicitly that this is the business I want, or there's this classic analogy, like if you ask people in the 1900s what they wanted, they would have said, I wanted a faster horse, versus automobile. So sometimes your customers can mislead you in directions which you did not necessarily take. But often enough, like, and this is where you need to be clear on what business are you running. Are you fundamentally creating something completely new? Are you inventing a new product which does not exist? In which case, listening to customers sometimes can not be very helpful. But in our business, we are not inventing a new product. We are making a business that already exists more efficient. In which case, sometimes your customers will have amazing insights. And even today, we learn a lot from our customers. We learn a lot from our suppliers. We learn a lot from our employees, because they are often closest to the ground, and then they can share things which we may get to that answer anyway, but it would take us 3 months, 6 months, or much longer, and we would make a lot of mistakes. And that's what we did well. Like our customers kept on asking, like, can I use your? They were asking them in the form of feature requests. Can you build a feature which can do X? Can you build a feature which can do Y? Which ultimately distilled down to discovery of new suppliers. And we felt that, okay, if discovery is such a big pain point, why don't we attack that first? And just orient the conversation around us being a discovery company, which also does all these other features, versus the other way around, where we have so many features of which discovery is one among them. I think that was the key insight for this.
No, that's absolutely fantastic, and I definitely encourage people to pay attention to the early signals from the market, right? And one other trick that I have often used and recommended to startups is Go figure out if the problem you're solving on an unsolicited basis will be one of the top 10 problems for that client or that customer, right? If it is not, like what are your top 3 or 5 problems for 2023? If it doesn't show up, it's probably not going to be top of the stack for them to do it.
In fact, I remember one more example. Like when we were meeting one of our customers, he showed us his inbox and we had a meeting at 9:30 a.m. He showed us his inbox at 9:30 a.m. He had 100 emails. He says, I cannot navigate this. I have no idea what each of these email is for. It was all from various vendors who had various problems, and they were communicating via, the problem with email was every row is one context. Whereas when you're actually outsourcing manufacturing, every project should be one row tip, if I can articulate it well enough. So, and all the communication should be around that one unit. So the unit itself, was there's a big mismatch between what customers wanted and the existing tools that could serve. So not all of it was very explicit, but people showed their problems to you, and as entrepreneurs, sometimes that is that art which you have to distill those problems and create solutions which can address that pain point.
One last question on this topic, which is just your conversation reminded me of the Andon cord, right? The Toyota kind of manufacturing system, famous point, right? Which is to say that anybody can pull the Andon cord and stop manufacturing process if they notice some aberrant or abnormality. Which was your point about, look, we take ideas from everywhere. Could be customers, could be employees, could be partners, etc. The flip side of the question is, you will have 100 ideas at any given time, and now even more so as you're a bigger company than you were, say, 4 years ago. So how do you distill and distinguish which of these has potential and which of these is, just sort of another random, not random, but I mean, it's a creative idea, but maybe the time is not right yet.
Yeah, so we have, it's a constant challenge, and I think it's becoming tougher to your point, as the company becomes larger. One thing we have done as a business, which has really worked well for us, and this is more of a scale issue, is the way we have set up the company's org structure, and in some way the culture of the company. Like we have a very decentralized way of working. So we have at any point in time 20, 30 leaders who all take their own decisions, and so some of these challenges we have out delegated to others,
pushed,
and the reason it works is because within their kind of lens at which they look at the business, they are able to take these decisions faster. Now the flip side of that is you end up building some flab in the org. Like there are some functions which you have redundancy. You could have maybe been more efficient. Instead of having 5 sales teams, you could have had 1 sales team which looked at the entire kind of business. But what we have gained is speed as an org. So the time between an idea to whether it's being a yes or no is very fast in our company, and there are certain ideas which transcend the scope of that individual, and that's when those come up and they get. So we see at my level, I see a very filtered version of all the things that ultimately get generated from the business. But a filtered version does not mean that the things that get unfiltered get killed. They also get the right amount of love. So that is one thing we have done, and I strongly believe in it. Now we are having different challenges. Now when we have reached a certain scale, we want to combine some functions so that we don't make the same mistakes twice. The problem with this structure is sometimes you can make the same mistakes twice, which is something, of course, as an org we want to avoid. But at least at the beginning, this served us really well. That as much as possible, as founders, we took ourselves out of the equation. That this decision we are not taking. You have to take this decision basis the inputs you are getting from the market.
Great. Switching gears, Amrit, let's talk about the other part of this, right, which is the supply side, which is what you've taken the audacious step of trying to first digitize, then partner, and now I saw some news articles that you're even investing in some of that. So how did you go about streamlining that? Because that's a pretty, if I may say so, a serious endeavor, right? Because these are all I'm assuming many of them originally were all mom and pop type of manufacturers, and they're doing what they're doing, but you're trying to make a internationally kind of scalable business. I mean, starting within India, but eventually you wanted to go international. So how did you go about doing that and foraying into streamlining that?
Yeah, I mean, here I'll come back to one excellent advice I received from somebody, and it was very simplistic, but I felt it was really applicable to us. Like in any business, there is, let's say, quote unquote, a demand side, there is a supply side, and then there are internal stakeholders for your employees. And at some point, it will become extremely clear which part of the business is the constraint towards growing the business. In some cases, demand and supply are sorted, but you need to build that right set of talent pool. You need to have like the enough engineers, as an example, that we could build everything as fast enough. In some cases, getting customers is difficult. I could say that for SaaS, like it is forever. Getting customers is never a solved problem. In our case, demand is solved for in some way. If it is, our business is very similar to build it and they will come. If you have enough great supply, there is infinite demand for our business. And this equation, getting to this equation, at what point in time, what are those characteristics of supply if you have in your business? Demand tends to infinity. I think that's the constant discovery process we are on. In some cases, we realize that there is, and in majority of the cases, we realize there is enough depth in the manufacturing ecosystem in India. For historical reasons, they have not been tapped to their fullest potential. I can give a very simple example. A supplier who's sitting in Trichy in South India views everybody above 100, 200 kilometer radius with suspicion. They don't speak the same language. If there are any disputes, they have to physically travel 100, 200 kilometer to solve these disputes. And they've historically felt that I don't want to do this. But whereas when they work with us as a platform, all of these trust issues are kind of solved for. India being one country, but really 20 countries, through us, they can navigate the rest of India, which was historically challenging. So we are able to do that for our suppliers. Second thing we are able to do, we underwrite a supplier from a technical point. They have 10 machines. Each of those machines can do X, Y, Z, and hence these are the wide range of products they can manufacture. Historically, this supplier would have a typical background. Like my co-founder Srinath's father is a great example. He was an employee at BHEL for 10 years. He left BHEL and set up his own small manufacturing unit. BHEL was his only customer for the next 10 years because that was the world that they were part of. That was the network they were part of. But he did not know that the same set of machines he had could serve L&T, could serve 20 other customers. We are able to know that. So a lot of times we know our suppliers better than they know themselves. And we take a lot of pride in that, so that we can kind of help them navigate the entirety of the market versus the market that they were historically familiar with. And lastly, we sometimes see, rarely, that for various specific manufacturing requirements, the supply does not exist at all. The way it has been solved, India is importing products. Like if you take the entire consumer electronics supply chain, very little is manufactured in India. Mostly everything is imported from China. And then we take a position. Are we going to wait for 5 years, 10 years for that to change? Or do we want to change that today? Because we have the ability as a company to do so today. So in those cases, we are more than happy to invest in creating new supply. So it is a very small part of our business today. Our general belief is there is a lot of depth in manufacturing in India, and through various technology interventions, through various cultural interventions, you can make that available to a wider range of customers.
So Amit, I can totally buy the point that the suppliers you could have with just one keyword, which is demand, right? Give me demand, like I'll work with you, right? True for any marketplace, really. How did you, and I really appreciate the nuanced point about the same set of machines or the same set of manufacturing capability can give them multiple different products that they can get into, not just multiple different, buyers, right? So that is amazing. But just for you as a company to undertake that mission of getting that quality control, getting the management of the supply, getting, reliability, etc., because your clients, meaning the demand that you are generating, they don't really care. They're relying on Zetwerk that this is going to happen. was and I think you mentioned something called cultural interventions. I don't know if that is the one. How do you bring that up to snuff, right? It's very different than even an Ola or Uber driver, right? You're just like, look, you eventually need to transport from point A to point B and maintain a certain level of quality of service. Here, it's a little bit more complicated, right, to say the least.
Yes. No, it is a complex. It's a hard problem. And that's why I say sometimes you need a little bit of naivete as a founder. I don't know if I knew all of this, would I have been still as excited during our seed stage? Maybe so. But there would have been always enough reasons to kind of say, oh, this is too difficult, and but today what has happened is today nothing feels too difficult because we have such a strong kind of backbone infrastructure that we have built that the incremental problem does not feel that tough to solve. That being said, as I said, for every business, ultimately there has to be one or two things which you do really well, which eventually become modes. For us, we really go very deep into this place. Like when we onboard a supplier, we collect 200, 250 data points. Who are they? What machines they have? Which customers have they worked with before? What quality systems they have? Who is the founder? Is it their main business or a side business? We really deeply profile from a technical lens. Not like a. It's not like how a bank underwrites from a financial lens. And we felt that this is completely missing. You can't get this information on Google. And there are 10, if you ask 10 different companies how they profile vendors, they will have 10 different processes. So in some way, what we are doing is we are picking the best from every company and building that master list, which is applicable to every company. And it is to begin with a one-time exercise, but you need to refresh it as you do more transactions. And over a period of time, what happens is we have the bird's eye view of who are the best manufacturers in the country, and who are quote unquote not the best, who are, let's say, tier 2, tier 3, and at some point our business becomes finding the best manufacturers in the country and bearing them, providing them with all kinds of services. It starts with demand. Today we offer logistics, we offer working capital, we offer procurement. So the idea is to become the best business partner of choice for the best manufacturers in the country, and over a period of time we will also help the tier 2 guys become as good as tier 1. If we do that well, we don't have to spend any energy on customer acquisition as a business. Our customers will come, and in some way we have seen that play out for us over the last 4 years. So then the problem statement becomes very simple. You have to just find the best guys in the country and offer them the best services so that they become partners to you forever. If they grow, we grow with them. So that's a simple one-line equation as a business.
No, excellent. Very, very heartening to hear. That also leads me to think aloud a little bit with you and brainstorm to say that perhaps what you're saying is whatever capabilities India has, whether it's in the manufacturing sector or the agriculture sector, or any kind of other services which are unorganized, but they're there, right? They're all mom and pop. I left their example about the Trichy supplier, right? If there were platforms that could help bring them demand, bring them some level of quality control, some level of technical prowess, etc., they could all really help India leapfrog, right? Just from being very point solutions or some focused on certain corridors. Would that be a fair statement across other industries? Did you look at anything other than manufacturing? I know you're
yeah. I mean,
our
first job. I always say that we looked at agriculture very strongly. Like both me and Srinath, we started our careers at the agribusiness division at ITC. So agriculture is still, I would say, very strong passion area for me. We just felt, and this was our bias, that sometimes when you're too deep in one sector, you look at some of the negatives also. We just felt that it would take a longer time to build a scale business because the problems, the unit is much smaller. Like at least at a manufacturer, we're talking about businesses who do 1 crore to 5 crore of revenue. Those are our suppliers. When you're talking about a farmer, it comes down to 1 lakh. So you have to work with 100 farmers to generate the same, equivalent kind of revenue. and that just felt even more daunting to us. And we felt we'll do it at a later date. But to your point, I generally agree. We have seen this at ITC. Like, uh, ITC had a brilliant strategy. Like at some point, ITC realized that there are not enough people who are getting into agriculture new, because the economics of agriculture is not working out. So if you look at most farmers, the children are not becoming farmers. The children are going into software or something else, which is completely fine. But then who will become farmers in the next generation? The economics have to work. So ITC as a business realized this is an important enough problem for them, and they have a huge program on how do you improve the cost of economics of farming as a profession, out of which ITC will benefit maybe half of it, but it is a more industry kind of initiative. And I feel that the same thing does apply to various other non-service businesses. They have to become quote unquote sexy again. We are playing a small part in that, in what has historically been not a very sexy industry.
Yeah, no, fantastic, fantastic. Um, just switching gears a little bit and talking about making India attractive to international manufacturers or international demand, right? You were citing the example earlier when we were chatting about how how software has been exported, and to some degree edtech has been exported. Can we do that with manufacturing? So can you talk a little bit about your own journey to take Zetwerk international now that there is some meaningful revenue that you're deriving from the international part of the business?
Today, almost one quarter of our business, like 25% of our business, comes from international markets. And what I mean by that is our customer is outside India. Most of the manufacturing still happens in India, though we have shifted that also. Today, almost 10% of our supply is also outside India. So we are present in markets like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Middle East on the supply side, and primarily North America and Europe on a demand side. And we have done this in a model where still 99% of our employee base is in India. So we do have employees outside India, but majority, by and large, this business has been built outside of it from India. Some of it has been, we have been again at the right place at the right time, like especially in the last 1 year and last 2 years during COVID. What the world realized is that they can't rely on a single destination for all of their procurement requirements, which historically used to be China. What China's done really well is they offer an end-to-end solution. You just give your specs. Everything is available in a 100-kilometer radius. If you want to buy, let's say, a TV, all the raw material, all the components, all the electronics, everything you can find in a very confined geography, and they work really well in sync. There is a lot of transparency in how they operate, which ultimately leads to reliability. India has historically had a challenge with reliability, but what the world has realized that they can't depend on a single country. Today, we can take that as an example. China is pretty much shut for the last few months because of their encounter with COVID. And a lot of companies are struggling to source the same components. And that is leading to inflation, that is leading to all kinds of other issues. So the world decided that they will apply a China plus one strategy last year. And which means that they will still have China as the main sourcing destination, but they will find another country which can be at least a meaningful percentage of their procurement. And when you look at the world like that, there are only 2 or 3 countries in the world who can satisfy that requirement at scale, India being one of them. There's no country as large enough who has that kind of depth into their manufacturing ecosystem. Of course, we are not there yet. We can't compare ourselves with China, but we have started our journey as a country. There's a lot of regulatory support also today. There's a new incentive scheme called PLI, which incentivizes production. For every unit you make, you get some additional incentives. All of these things are steps in the right direction. I feel that over the next 10, 20 years, we will see a lot of Make in India push, a lot of Make in India for the world push. And while today it's 25% of our business, it can easily be the other way around, where we become primarily like more, the world is very untapped that way. So that's we're very excited about that. I think Of course, our hearts and minds are in India, but I think when you build a global business, those global standards ultimately become part of the same Indian standards. The way you look at quality, the way you look at timelines, the way you look at contracts. There's no process for a US customer versus a different process for an Indian customer. They're all the same. And I feel like net net the country benefits.
Absolutely. No, and even if you think of somebody like Apple, one of the most sophisticated consumer tech companies in the world, I see all their products saying designed in California.
Yeah.
It's manufactured somebody else, and actually India is just a hotbed of creative talent. So I think we could also be designed in India and manufactured in India, but sold globally. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, not just the parts, but the whole.
That ecosystem is extremely exciting. And in fact, while we don't work for Apple, but we do design the hearables, Bluetooth headsets for a wide variety of customers who the primary business is in India. And if you look at these customers, their options before Zetwerk were to pretty much buy it from China. They had zero options. This is an example where we felt that there is no supply at all in the country, and we are happy to create supply. So we have set up we've invested in a manufacturing unit in Noida, which makes Bluetooth headsets, speakers, etc. And initially, it is to service the Indian market, but the idea is to use it as a hub for exports as well.
Wonderful, Amrit. As we come close to the end of the podcast here, one final sort of set of questions, which is about your own journey as an entrepreneur. In particular, to make it more terse, what are one or two lessons that you have learned along the way of things that you would do again and again, and anybody listening in, you would advise them to do? And what are maybe one or two things that you would caution people and say, hey, maybe this is a mistake I made, and hopefully other people at least skip this one, may and make a fresh mistake?
Yeah. A lot of this is so personal that and it's so you get shaped by the experiences you have in some way. So I think some of the things we did well, I think we were very intentional about culture from day one. We did want to build a company. So we looked at companies whose cultures we admired. And we tried to get people from those companies. And we also tried to understand what exactly it was about them and have a point of view. I think the most important thing to have is a point of view on everything. Your point of view can be right or wrong, but going in a very kind of predefined manner is the most dangerous thing in my mind. And then your culture gets decided on your behalf versus the other way around. So we have a culture which is highly transparent. Every metric in our company is visible to every person in our company. We try and operate in a very decentralized way, and we have a very strong bias to speed. We prioritize speed over perfection. These are the three broad tenets, and we have some derivatives of that. And I feel like it is important to be intentional about it in the beginning itself, because these things can otherwise just be decided on your behalf. I think the second thing is having we are profitable as a business. In fact, we turned profitable last year when that was not the flavor of the season. There was a lot of emphasis on growth. While we did grow as a business, we also became profitable. And I think profitability is also a button that you can't decide you will be profitable tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. It's a multi-year journey. And again, if it is baked into your culture that you look at profitability as an important reason for your existence, then you start prioritizing that on day one itself, and you make less irrational decisions on hindsight. My personal journey has been, this is my first time as an entrepreneur, first time as CEO. I think I'm making more mistakes than anyone else can imagine. I think I've made every mistake possible, but I think it starts with what is the intent, what is the vision. If those things are clear, then the mistakes don't hurt as much because you know why they are happening. And then as an org, can you make sure that those mistakes don't happen again? I think if these things can be done well, then that's I got a very good advice, which I would love to repeat here. I think the advice was that don't be in a hurry to be a large company. I think everything requires patience. but as a founder, are you still plugged into what is happening in your company? I think the longer you can stay, you can say confidently that the answer to that question is yes. I think the more likely you are to be successful.
That is fantastic. I don't think we have anything better to wrap this podcast with. But Amrit, really delighted to hear your and Zetwerk's journey. And I think there are a lot of interesting lessons learned for founders that are listening in. So thank you so much, Amrit, for being on the Prime Venture Partners podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.